Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for the one who has learned the forbidden art of combining both Goth and Gyaru. The Dragon of Droughts, it's Vritra. She's a 5-star Lancer introduced in this year's Christmas event, and lucky for all of you, she's getting added to the general pool, so you can look forward to getting spooked by her for years to come. This means the Lancerioma enthusiasts among you will have cause to resent her soon enough, but for the rest of us, let's see if our new long stick expert has been worth the wait. Leading off Vritra's kit is Piercing Vajra. It's a 3-turn arts buff with 1 turn of arts star absorption. If you're gonna try to farm with her, you'll need this leveled. Vritra doesn't have anything else in the way of crit support, whether free stars or crit damage modifiers, so don't expect much from her on that front. That said, you do have the option of incorporating some crit synergy into your team with 20/30 on your supports, the various crit damage codes, and on slower fights using teammates like Lady Avalon to add a bit of burst to your playstyle. Next up, we've got Sworn Enemy of the Gods. It's a party anti-divine buff and personal 30% battery. First of all, don't use Vritra as a dedicated anti-divine support. You're gonna have Santa Martha for that, and she's way better at it. However, there is hypothetically room to run her in a 2-attacker setup. In normal farming gameplay, these historically underperformed compared to single-attacker looping teams. However, the JP server has started getting 90++ nodes, which are highly efficient, but feature abnormal enemy arrangements and extremely high health final bosses. These damage and refriend thresholds strictly restrict the pool of valid servants, so it's possible that we get a node with like a 1-3-2 arrangement of enemies where you want a second attacker to deal with wave 1 and nuke down the final boss while Vritra takes out wave 2 and then hits the final wave to take out the side mob while also chipping the boss. If the final boss or wave 1 door boss are divine, then Vritra can give your second attacker that anti-divine buff to meet your damage requirement. Now, I'm not saying that Vritra is someone you should get specifically for this purpose. If anything, there's another Lancer coming in Lost Belt 6 that's a lot better for 90++ team building. But if you have Vritra, it's something you can look into. As for the battery, it's a nice touch. 30% in combination with the 20% starting charge of pen skill gives Vritra some wiggle room on using Castoria's buffs, and against messier nodes, it can bail you out. Vritra's final standard skill is Indestructible Demon. It's a Guts, 10% charge per turn effect, and a one-time party NP damage buff. The charge per turn and the one-time buff give conflicting incentives, so you'll have to find out if you need to pop it early to make up for a refund shortfall or on the final wave for damage. Vritra has the highest raw attack of all Lancers, eclipsing even Romulus Quirinus, but as you've seen, she has all of one reliable steroid, so she leans very heavily on that attack stat. Keep that in mind, because odds are, you're gonna have to make compromises when you use Vritra. Her noble phantasm is Ashura Shreshta. It's an AoE arts attack with skill seal, crit chance reduction, also arts resistance down on overcharge. These side effects only really matter if your target survives the first attack, so they're not relevant to farming. However, if you take Vritra into boss fights, you can leverage the skill seal in particular to prevent your target from spamming defensive effects, something Vritra otherwise has no answer to. In other words, you gotta strike first, and strike often. Otherwise, it gets the job done. Even if you're not fighting a divine enemy, her peak damage exceeds Melt's. However, that assumes she has her third skill's NP damage buff, which she won't for all 3 waves. My point is that for general usage, Mysterious Alter Ego Lambda is a very high bar to clear. Now, before I continue that line of thought, I have a confession to make. I've been pretty harsh on Vritra on stream. I compared her to Bradamante and Zhang Yu as like a sort of higher damage but less reliable version of a 4-star attacker, but that's overselling it. I've had some time to think about it, and if you take her in a vacuum, I think Vritra is an acceptable farmer. She's not Bradamante, it's hard for anyone to get as screwed as Bradamante, but the problem occurs when you take her out of that vacuum and compare her to the lower rarity farming arts Lancers, specifically Melt and Finn. They get the job done too, and Melt does it so well that she can run into bullshit nodes and brute force a decent number of them. Vritra may have a stat advantage, especially over Finn, but consider the premium that you're paying for using a 5-star servant. Gameplay-wise, there's the additional deployment cost, sure. Usually not a deal breaker, but 4-star attackers let you mess around with your backline bond a lot more. Small potatoes? I agree. Now let's consider the more important part, the quartz cost. Getting a 4-star servant is substantially easier than nabbing a specific 5-star, let alone trying to get them to NP5. And what exactly is it that you're getting for that trade-off? A little extra damage? An anti-divine skew? Some debuff utility? It just doesn't add up for me. Now, Meltryllis is limited, so Vritra's real advantage is that she can be obtained year-round if you're lucky, or perhaps unlucky. I don't think anyone going for Fairy Knight Lancelot's gonna be happy to see her, but the point is that if you like have an NP1 Vritra or something, you should treat her as a stopgap until the Sea Monster Crisis event, which isn't for a while, but it's the next time Mysterious Alter Ego Lambda has a proper banner. But enough sucking off Pingu peg legs. I'd imagine you'd want to know how to exploit Vritra, so let's just assume you don't have a better alternative. Obviously, double Castoria is your bread and butter. For farming encounters, you NP 3 times in a row and commit your battery and third skill as needed if you suspect you'll fall short. For boss fights, just beat them into submission with repeated NPs while restricting their tools for fighting back, with your crit chance debuff and skill seal. For any situation that allows it, you'll want Black Rail as any NP spammer would, but against Divine lineups, you have Fun Dawn for longer fights where you have to worry about face carding. If you think you can finish that fight in 3 turns though, there's Versus, an extremely old and rare Chaldea Boys craft essence. If you're the 1 in a million player who has a limit broken, it'll give a colossal 100% anti-divine damage buff, also a ton of defense. Failing that, 2023 summer event is going to come with Ocean Flyer, a free CE with arts and P damage, starting charge, and an offensive stat distribution. While we're looking into the future, I'd recommend saving some quartz to get Oberon. His massive battery combo and damage buff make him a useful swap-in against heavy boss waves, and he can assist in weird charge situations that you encounter in 90+ nodes and other more difficult fare. Now here's a fun fact about Oberon. He has a passive that actually shits on allied Merlins by reducing their buff success rate, so you're incentivized not to run them together. But for whatever reason, whether a programming oversight or secret lore, this doesn't happen to Lady Avalon. Spoilers by the way, she's Merlin. She just happens to be Merlin from a version of Fate no one gives a shit about. So you can actually run them together without anti-synergy, and in certain fights where you're on the clock, but you also need a mix of protection and burst, you might actually want that combo. Now you might be wondering who you pair Vritra with on 90++ nodes where you often need multiple attackers. It largely depends on the node, but for budget players the answer is usually a freelancer like Summer Concert U or Kagetora. However, that doesn't exclude some of the more exotic choices that actually have Vritra synergy. You see, Vritra has a number of buffable traits. On the less practical end, you have animal traits, which means you can run her with Koyanskaya of Darkness, aka the bad one. There's female, which lets her bum off Lancer Elizabeth's attack buff. The problem here is that Elizabeth is an AoE Lancer herself, and not a particularly great one in the damage department. That said, she does have utility in the challenge quest department, like a future upgrade with buff purge and skill seal, so keep this one in your back pocket. No, the most exploitable part of Vritra's trait list is the fact that she's a dragon. This lets you run her with Jalter. Not only does Vritra get those attack buffs, but Jalter can punch through any berserkers on mixed nodes with her NP, and, if necessary, big crits. For Vritra's command codes, I'd go with one of 2 themes. First, we have arts crits. Brush of a Mad Painter gives you raw crit damage. However, I think relying entirely on piercing Vadra's absorption buff is a mistake. Delaying your 3-turn arts buff to fish for 1 turn of crits doesn't seem like the greatest trade-off to me. Instead, consider the arts absorption codes like the Inexperienced Fantasies Command Seal and the future code Kernel Automaton. These will unshackle you from your active skills and let you take crits opportunistically. If your Castorias have something like 2030 or you're running Lady Avalon, that flexibility is going to pay dividends. The other theme is NP damage. On this front, I'd recommend everyone's Girl Da Vinci, since it plays in the double attacker setups. If you pull it early, oh well, just take the bonus damage. But if you get it on turn 3, you can give your Wombo combo some extra punch against the big boss. Should you roll specifically for Vritra? Judging by my spiel earlier, you're probably thinking no, and I'm inclined to agree. But there is some nuance. There's value in a loop-compatible Arts Lancer. It's just the playing field is so brutally stacked already and the competition is only going to get worse. Now if you don't have Summer Melt or even Finn McCool, Vritra can fill that role in your lineup and act as either a stopgap or a pricey replacement. But the real killer in my book is the opportunity cost. This coming year is filled with powerhouse servants, all of whom want your savings. Oberon and Koyanskaya of Light are extremely high-value supports. Morgan is a powerhouse attacker that also enables an extremely degenerate and effective stall team. Fairy Knight Lancelot is a crazy flexible Lancer that blows Vritra away in 90++ potential, and on the same banner as Fairy Knight Lancelot is the 4-star Percival, who's a formidable farming arts Lancer in his own right. Then look at the other high-value farmers. Summer Kama is a generalist arts attacker, and Muramasa is in a class where good farmers are currently in extremely short supply. The Saber Crown is on Jason's head right now. Jason! And the ultimate insult to injury. This same year is going to bring the 5-star Lancer Ryoma, another AoE arts attacker who's in a very similar boat to Vritra. And while the two technically have different SKUs, Ryoma's kit looks a hell of a lot better to me on paper. Ain't that a kick in the nuts? The sheer number of alternatives means that in the overall Lancer pie, Vritra ends up with a very small slice she can truly call her own, that anti-divine niche. And I just don't think it's enough to justify going for her in meaningful quantities. It's actually kinda sick how lopsided things are between classes. Like watching Sabers die of thirst in the desert, while Vritra is in a nice, cool shack getting waterboarded. Would it be in bad taste if I recommended watching my melt video now? Ah, fuck it. Scope out the competition. Otherwise, like if you found this video useful, subscribe for more, and come watch me at twitch.tv/Finotaisen, where I stream every weekend, 3 PM Pacific time, Friday through Sunday. See you there.